Today, we want to have a short conversation about breathe as more than a project or a breathing exercise. We want to look at it as a learning experience that grew out of real life stress, care, and the need to pause with compassion. So Safiro and I are going to be responsive to several questions with regard to breathe. I will begin with asking her the first question, and then I will also answer that question. Then she will ask me the next question, and then she will answer it for herself. The first question that we have today is, when we say we began to breathe, what are we really talking about?
I know when I discuss the concept of breathe and the phrase "we begin to breathe" is going back to the base sense of safety for our body. So when I breathe, it's a natural occurrence. My body naturally knows how to breathe the same way it naturally knows how to heal. But when I get stuck in my head, that kind of disrupts the natural flow of allowing the healing to begin, which is also through the breath, which is how stressed we are, how much anxiety we're keeping in our muscles, in our tendons. So when I say we begin to breathe, I'm really speaking on regulation and co-regulation with how we regulate ourselves and how we regulate with other people.
Very well. When I say that I began to breathe on November 10th of 2025, is because that was the first episode of Breathe, our Monday morning reset podcast that we had begun. That was the first Monday. And that helped me on a learning journey with regard to how to be self-compassionate, how to take a moment for myself, and how to ensure that I am in that very moment taking a breath that is not shallow, because most of my life I've been breathing shallowly because I have not been taking deep breaths. And so my system has consistently been on what we call the yellow light moments, which is expecting something negative to happen. So you are in the fight or flight mode. So when I say I began to breathe November 10th, 2025, I began to understand all of the different facets. Well, I wouldn't say that I began to understand the different facets. I began to understand that there are facets that I needed to understand.
So, what life pressures made this kind of pause feel necessary?
Well, for me, I've been stressed all my life, and I didn't know it. For the past 30 plus years, I've been stressed. And I ended up in the hospital several times for chest pains. And eventually, on May 2024, I was treated at the emergency room for emotional shock, because even though what had caused me to end up at the hospital at that time, the process had been happening and was improving, I was still ailing internally, emotionally, psychologically, with pressures that had not been resolved. And so, specifically and directly, because of those pressures, there was an event that made me realize that I needed to stop, take a pause. And I began to understand that I needed to focus on my own personal breathing. And that's how it started for me. So, Safiro, what life pressures made this kind of pause feel necessary for you?
For me, it was similar. Knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to get it. And I found myself wrestling with suicidal ideation. So I struggled with suicidal ideation, and I put myself in the hospital with the help of a friend. And I started going deeper into trying to find answers with my own head. It's where I mentioned, finding like overthinking and trying to find and resolve answers with logic, doing everything I can to avoid feeling the issues that were unraveling in my body and moving around. So definitely the anxiety, which was also anger and also deep grief and sadness, which was also hiding fear. And I had to really allow myself to sit quietly, which was very hard. I always felt like I had to move and do something, but what I found when I sat quietly in silence and I allowed myself to breathe consciously, or at least be aware, if it wasn't like slow, purposeful breaths, if I couldn't get to that point in my body, I would just observe my breath. And that alone was what really helped me acknowledge the stress in my body and name what it was about. What did we already know from life before we had formal language for it?
So tacit knowledge is the knowledge that we have because of what we have lived. So for me, I immediately go to fight or flight. I knew what fight or flight was before I had a formal language for it. That's the sympathetic system, which in our bodies prepares us for fighting or fleeing. The alternative is rest and digest, which is our parasympathetic system, which that's the formal language for it. That's what it's called. So my awareness of breathing and how it affected myself, my being, I knew what it was, but I did not know what it was called. How did working together change the way we listen to each other?
So I definitely struggled with speaking up plainly. I was very hyper aware, and I was taught to be hyper aware of what I would say, because typically the types of things that I wanted to say, people, usually the women in my life, did not appreciate what I had to say and how I said it. So I listened more than I spoke. So working together changed the way I listened to you specifically, is because I started listening to what I needed to say rather than how you felt about it, which was hard at first. But I really needed to I didn't feel like I was being clear. I didn't feel like I was being heard. And I kept having to repeat myself, which was super frustrating. But when I got to the point where I'm like, okay, so if I tell you how I feel and how certain things are being received from me, like the types of information I can receive in that way, I was less concerned. I grew less concerned about how the input was being shared rather than making sure I was being clear with what I'm saying. So that helped.
That I don't have to carry the conversation or try to determine what Zafira's response will be. We leave it open when we have our time together at the podcast so that we are able to even then talk about what we're learning. Mm-hmm. That I think has, because we set that time apart, whether the people show up or people don't, we we are there to discuss what we're learning, and that makes it more a more present situation for me. What did we learn from holding the Monday sessions?
I think that holding the Monday sessions consistently or fairly consistently, even when days that his schedule didn't work as planned and we would have to cancel. Learning how to show up is ultimately the biggest lesson that I learned on the Monday sessions, because there were definitely early mornings where it was not working out. But communicating that and adjusting the schedule also helped.
Yes, I agree that pushing it forward to 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock Central and 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock Eastern was more helpful. And I agree again that the most difficult part was just showing up. Once we are there,
It's
though,
different, yeah.
it moves forward. It's like, okay, in Puerto Rico, we say a lo que vinimos, which means to the thing we came to. So yeah, that's what I would say on that question. Which big tents show up most clearly, and why?
Well-being is an obvious one. I think communication is a given because it's a podcast. Collaboration because it is not one person instructing another. It is a joint experiential learning. So we learn based off of our stories. I think it takes a lot of resilience to continue to do a podcast, because podcasts don't have an expiration date unless you decide to stop it. And I think there's a lot of deep reflection because we use our everyday experience for it.
Mhm.
Those are the ones that come in very clearly to me.
Well, of course, the fact that we have lifelong learning from when we began to breathe and going forward. But even when we did not know how to breathe, I think that taught us what not to do.
Yeah.
So it's lifelong learning. So of course, equity and justice, because we want everybody to be able to have access to well-being and to understand that they are being seen and heard, that they have agency on themselves, that they are actually able to say, I'm going to take this micro moment to be self-compassionate and bring myself to a place where I feel regulated and I am able to move forward and produce more effectively. Because when we don't breathe, our mind doesn't work as well. When we are suppressing our release from the fight or flight, we are also filling the mind with thoughts that flee through our mind, that don't allow us to relax. So self-agency and equity and justice. I agree that you don't have to be super rich to be okay. You just need to have the ability to uh, to to be well, and to know that it is all in your mind. If you are an able-bodied person with nothing hurting you, but you're still stressed that so much that you can't even breathe, then breaking out of that. Usually, money is the biggest thing, but even with lacking of money, we can still allow ourselves that sense of well-being by understanding that we've made it this far. We just need to breathe to make it to the next place.
As we close, what stands out to me is that breathe is not about escaping life. It is about learning how to meet life with more awareness, compassion, and steadiness. Through this project, We have learned that a pause can become a practice. A practice can become a form of care, and a care can become a way of leading. Breathe adds the color of compassionate resilience to my learning mosaic because it shows how lived experience, reflection, and relationship can become something useful, healing, and shared. Following piece,
And the previous piece.
the previous piece is inspired by an AI
Reviewing our work.
reviewing our
Okay.